Program Manager. Also have Will Inselman, our Assistant Division Administrator in our Research and Inventory section. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's public input meeting regarding updates to our agency's Berggren Pheasant Plan. We've already received a lot of feedback on our website. It's great to see this level of engagement from our state's upland bird hunters. As of 6 p.m., I believe we had 275 folks pre-registered, so it's great. As a general outline for today's discussion, I will be presenting a preview of the plan, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions and comments. We have quite a few agency staff on hand tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge a few of our commissioners who are also in attendance. This includes Bob Allen, John Hoggett, Pat Berggren, and past Commissioner Jared Burke. I may have missed a few others that registered later this afternoon. The main rule tonight is that everyone is respectful and polite to one another. We look forward to hearing your questions and feedback on the plan, but any form of disrespect or foul language won't be tolerated. I do ask that you wait until the end of the presentation to ask questions. We will have everyone on mute throughout the presentation. And rather than everyone trying to talk over each other here on Zoom, it generally works better if you type your questions and comments in the chat at the bottom of your screen when the time comes. I would like to ask that everyone please stop their video. That will improve the quality of our recording. And with that, I'd like to notify everybody that tonight's meeting will be recorded to help us compile input on the plan. So tonight I'll be providing an overview of the history of pheasants in Nebraska, and we'll discuss the primary factors that drive pheasant populations today. I'll also summarize our past efforts and accomplishments from the original Berggren Plan and provide a preview of the updated plan. As many of you know, Nebraska's pheasant populations peaked in the 1950s and 60s and have generally declined since that time frame. This figure displays the statewide pheasant index from the July Rural Mail Carrier Survey, which dates back to 1955. Along the y-axis, these values represent the number of pheasants observed per 100 miles. Pheasant harvest has followed a similar trend over the years, shown in blue here. Record harvest occurred back in 1963 at nearly 1.5 million birds throughout the state, and harvest exceeded 1 million birds per year from 1958 to 1966. Over the past decade, annual harvest has remained below 200,000 birds per year. Clearly, there are a wide variety of factors that influence pheasant populations, but the availability of habitat and weather patterns are two major drivers. Severe weather events such as drought, hail, and winter storms can and do have detrimental effects on the population depending on their timing. But these impacts are generally very localized and short-term in nature and are also outside of our control. Research has shown that over the long term, habitat loss has been the primary cause of population declines. In Nebraska, habitat loss is primarily due to changes in agricultural land use over time, which was described in detail by Hiller et al. In 2009. Nebraska's landscape has changed dramatically since pheasant populations peaked in the 50s and 60s and continues to change today. These pictures on the left illustrate some of these changes that have occurred over time on a square mile section in Clay County from 1933, fast forwarded to 1993. Some of these changes are very obvious and others have been more subtle over time. Average farm sizes and field sizes have increased, row crops became more common in crop rotations throughout the state, and weed control efforts intensified. In contrast, the number of farms and diversity within cropping rotations declined. Small grains, such as winter wheat, disappeared in many areas of the state, and fewer grassland areas were left idle or undisturbed. This came on the heels of many advances in agricultural technology, such as irrigation, larger farming equipment, modern herbicides, and genetically modified crops, among others. At the same time, many of these land use changes were driven by federal ag policies. For example, populations responded positively to the soil bank program in the late 50s and early 60s, and major declines occurred in the 70s as fence row to fence row farming was encouraged by our Secretary of Ag. Populations leveled off in the mid 80s and early 90s following the authorization of the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, in the 1985 Farm Bill. Collectively, agricultural land uses over time have greatly reduced the availability of suitable habitat, and pheasants have predictably declined in our state. Research conducted in partnership with the university's Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit has taught us a great deal about pheasant habitat preferences and the factors that drive populations in Nebraska's modern agricultural landscape. Pheasants are a grassland-dependent species, but utilize a wide variety of habitat types to meet their annual life cycle needs. In today's landscape, I'm sorry that's covered up a little bit at the top. Pheasants are heavily reliant on undisturbed grasslands, most notably fields enrolled in the CRP program. This is especially true in areas of the state that lack small grains and other forms of suitable cover. CRP is the most highly preferred cover type for nesting and is used year-round by pheasants and other wildlife. This program is authorized under the USDA Farm Bill and is administered by the Farm Service Agency. CRP is one of the only conservation programs available that has the ability to restore habitat at the landscape scale, which is necessary to restore pheasant populations. In Nebraska, statewide CRP enrollment peaked from 1990 to 1996 at over 1.3 million acres. During that time frame, hunters harvested over 600,000 birds per year. Although it appears that total CRP enrollment has increased in recent years, following the blue line out to our current 2021, many of these new acres in recent years have consisted of existing grasslands, and many are hayed or grazed annually, which reduces their value to pheasants. When it comes to enrollment of the undisturbed CRP acres, which are of high value to pheasant populations, we currently have half as many acres as we did back in the mid-90s, which has greatly reduced pheasant hunting opportunities. The loss of CRP and other grassland habitats has been substantial, and a recent study indicated that over 3 million acres in Nebraska alone were converted back to cropland over the past 10 years. This area represents the same size or slightly larger than an area of Custer County. Through research, we also found that not all CRP is created equal in terms of its value to pheasants, and that pheasant abundance within a CRP field is influenced by habitat factors in the surrounding landscape. In general, we know that the availability of CRP, shown here on the x-axis, has a positive influence on pheasant abundance, shown on the y-axis. But this positive response was magnified if small grains were present in the surrounding landscape. With as little as 15% of the surrounding landscape planted to small grains, pheasant abundance nearly doubled. Unfortunately, winter wheat production has continued to decline in Nebraska and has reached record lows in recent years. Now, in contrast, the presence of trees in the surrounding landscape has had a negative effect on pheasant abundance. Increasing CRP has little benefit to pheasants when as little as 15% of the surrounding landscape was covered in mature trees. Unfortunately, tree cover has increased substantially over the past 20 years in Nebraska, especially in the eastern half of the state. Collectively, this creates some additional challenges for land managers working to restore pheasant populations, especially in eastern Nebraska, where small grains have disappeared from crop rotations and tree cover has increased substantially. Although pheasant hunting has become more isolated in Nebraska, the longstanding tradition of pheasant hunting and the demand for pheasant hunting opportunities remains strong in our state. Pheasant hunting also continues to provide a boost to rural economies in many areas of the state. Recent research indicates that pheasant hunting in Nebraska has had an economic impact of $23.5 million per year from 2015 to 2019. Another big challenge for today's hunters and anglers is land access. As many of you know, over 97% of Nebraska is privately owned. Over half of our state's upland bird hunters utilize public lands throughout the year, and the lack of access to private lands is considered one of the primary barriers limiting participation in many types of hunting. This is why increasing public access on private lands is a high priority for our agency in recent years. Our primary mechanism to do so is through the Open Fields and Waters Program, or OFW, which provides annual per acre payments to private landowners willing to allow public walk-in hunting access on their land. We also work cooperatively with a wide variety of partners throughout the state to facilitate public hunting opportunities, and we consolidate all the federal, state, and conservation partner lands, as well as private lands open to public hunting, into our annual Public Access Atlas publication that comes out each August. The original Berggren Plan was initiated back in spring of 2016 and was a 5-year plan ending in December of 2020. Progress has continued through 2021 as the plan was being updated. Our agency's mission is to improve the pheasant hunting experience in Nebraska by focusing on the manageable factors we feel our agency can control or influence. Improving habitat and increasing public access continue to be the cornerstone activities, but the plan is very comprehensive in nature, describes numerous strategies and tactics associated with ag policy, statutes and regulations, research, and other factors that have an influence on pheasant numbers, hunter numbers, and/or pheasant hunting opportunities in the state. Over the past 5 years, habitat work was focused within 8 priority areas that were identified in the original plan. The prioritization of these areas was primarily based on the pheasant habitat suitability model developed by Jorgensen et al. In 2014, associated with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Based on this research, creating and enhancing habitat in these areas provided the best return on investment in terms of a pheasant response to management activities. Within these 8 priority areas, region-specific landowner incentives were developed to help create and enhance habitat and increase public hunting on private lands. From 2016 to 2020, over 2,400 projects were completed with private landowners within the 8 focal areas, which positively impacted over 216,000 acres of pheasant habitat. These projects involved the use of financial incentives to encourage landowner participation in CRP, high-quality management activities on CRP lands and other habitat types, tree removal, and wildlife-friendly cover crops, among others. We also made significant gains in public access within the 8 priority areas. This graph shows our statewide enrollment in orange and enrollment within the priority areas shown in blue. Over the last 5 years, we enrolled an additional 108,000 acres into the Open Fields and Waters program within these 8 priority areas, and our current statewide enrollment is at a record high at over 382,000 acres. Similar to the original plan, we plan to continue to take a targeted approach moving forward, as it is not feasible to conduct work everywhere in the state. During the revision process, several changes were made to the priority areas, and these were made primarily in an attempt to capitalize on upcoming opportunities, such as the potential for new CRP enrollment or public access, or the number of upcoming CRP expirations within a given area. A couple of the more notable changes were the removal of the Central Platte and Southeast pheasant opportunity areas. Over the past 5 years, most work conducted along the Platte occurred on conservation partner lands such as the Nature Conservancy and Crane Trust, as opportunities were very limited on private lands due to the productive cropland along the river and other competing land uses such as deer and waterfowl hunting. This area is considered a biologically unique landscape, and work will continue in this area using funding through our state wildlife action plan. Likewise, many ongoing initiatives overlapped in the Southeast pheasant opportunity area, and other funding sources are available to continue habitat work in this area as well. That being said, we do recognize that the demand remains high for pheasant hunting opportunities near our state's urban population centers, and we plan to prioritize habitat restoration and management efforts within the Rainwater Basin and Eastern Saline Wetland complexes, which are located in eastern Nebraska. These complexes and their associated public lands provide some of the best pheasant hunting opportunities for hunters residing in Lincoln, Omaha, and the surrounding area. This is still a work in progress, but we plan to help complement existing conservation efforts by developing incentives for landowners to establish and manage habitat on private lands that are adjacent to many of the WMAs, WPAs, DU properties, and privately owned wetland easements throughout the region. These efforts will be focused in several habitat complexes that support a high density of publicly owned wetlands, again, to ensure we're getting the most bang for our buck in our management actions. Similarly, we hope to engage a number of different partners within the Eastern Saline Wetlands area north of Lincoln to help improve habitat on both public and private lands. Now, as I mentioned above, there continues to be a high demand for pheasant hunting opportunities in eastern Nebraska. Recognizing that land values and cash rental rates are much higher in the east, there's clearly a need to be as strategic as possible when it comes to restoring habitat. We recently partnered with UNL to conduct research within 2 regions of eastern Nebraska, and this project is designed to help identify minimum habitat thresholds necessary to support huntable pheasant populations based on the relationships between habitat densities and pheasant abundance. This project will also help determine the scale of effect, or in other words, how far patches can be from one another to have value for pheasants. Based on this work, a number of decision support tools will be developed that will facilitate a more targeted approach to conservation delivery in portions of eastern Nebraska moving forward. On the following slides, I'll be highlighting some of the updates to some of the strategies and tactics within the plan. Ag policy can have a huge impact on the availability of pheasant habitat in our state, and we plan to continue to help influence USDA programs and their delivery to benefit pheasants and other wildlife. Incentives associated with ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration, may provide new opportunities for habitat restoration as well. And we're always looking for new partnership opportunities and alternative funding sources to help support the work outlined in the plan. Pheasant abundance is directly influenced by the availability of habitat. So we will continue to encourage landowner participation in CRP and other pheasant-friendly management practices using financial incentives within the focal areas. We will continue to maintain and expand partnerships throughout the state and enhance pheasant habitat on our state-owned lands as well. We also plan to pilot a new initiative on pivot corners within 2 of our priority areas. Here we will be targeting our efforts to incentivize habitat establishment on dryland corners. We plan to continue expanding the Open Fields and Waters program to provide additional hunting and fishing opportunities on private lands throughout the state. We will be developing a strategic plan to help guide the future expansion of this program and other public access initiatives. We'll continue to facilitate public hunting opportunities on partner lands, and we'll continue to promote these and other public hunting opportunities throughout the state through a variety of outreach materials. We hope to continually adapt our approach to increasing public access to better meet the needs of today's hunters and anglers. We plan to evaluate and improve our various initiatives and partnerships associated with hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation in the new plan, including our pheasant releases. We hope to look into the possible ways to expand opportunities for youth and other novice hunters as well. We also hope to continue to make improvements to our upland forecast and create additional resources for hunters that pursue upland game in Nebraska. Habitat and access goals were updated for each of the priority areas. We also plan to make a concerted effort to work on private lands adjacent to many of our state-owned properties to maximize responses to management. Research and informational needs were also updated, and this includes the aforementioned research project in eastern Nebraska. We also will be working to better disseminate research findings to resource professionals, hunters, and the general public. Our communication plan is very comprehensive and identifies key partners who can aid in our agency's promotion and outreach activities associated with upland bird hunting and conservation efforts throughout the state. And lastly, we compiled a history of completed tactics from the original plan and listed the various peer-reviewed publications derived from past research projects in Nebraska. This concludes our preview of the updated plan. As a reminder, a copy of the plan is provided on our website at outdoornebraska.org/pheasant plan, the same place that you all pre-registered for tonight's meeting. And we will be accepting public comment on the plan through December 15th. All public input received tonight and on our website will be compiled and shared with staff who are involved with updating the plan. We've already received a lot of public input on the plan, and I may pull up some supporting slides and other information to help answer some of the more frequently asked questions that I assume will probably come up. As I mentioned earlier, it generally works best if you can type your questions and comments in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And like I said, we'll have a few folks kind of moderating and repeating the questions. And lastly, again, I urge folks to please be respectful of everyone on the call, and we'll start looking at going through the chat and the questions.
So John, the first
Yeah.
question in the chat is, how many pheasants will be released?
Sure. So in our in recent years, over the past 2 years, we released roughly 16,000 birds. This was primarily done on our our special youth hunts, which were basically birds were released prior to the youth season, the youth weekend. And then we also released birds on a number of areas prior to the Thanksgiving, extended Thanksgiving weekend as well. But that total the last couple of years has been right at 16,000.
All right, we've got another question in the chat. NCorp land owns about 19,000 acres southwest of North Platte. They have about 5,000 acres open to upland and bow deer hunting. What needs to happen to get additional land open? It's a tremendous resource that is not being fully utilized.
You bet. That's a great question, and we might fumble through this a little bit here, but Adam Kester we have on the call here tonight. He works out of North Platte. Adam, are you with us? Could you help us answer that question? I know you've been working with NCorp staff here lately.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, John. And we are currently working with NCorp. They did open up some more access here this last fall. An additional, it was almost additional 2 sections, and we've got an agreement with them to help with some habitat work, and we hope that it stems into some more access for hunters. So yeah, the future's looking good there. Hope to help them out and hopefully get some more opportunity there as well.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. Next question is, what can we do about predator control? Obviously, you went over habitat, but that's one of the factors. Do you have any comments on predator control, John?
You bet. And this question comes up a lot, especially what's going on in one of our neighboring states. I do have kind of a supporting slide here I'm going to flip to with some information on that. Here we go. So it is true that predators are a primary source of mortality for pheasants, both for all three, for nests, for adults, and also young birds as well. And many of our different predator species have increased in recent decades. That is well known. Overwhelmingly, the majority of peer-reviewed literature on predator control efforts show it's not an effective means to alleviate predation on ground nesting birds like pheasants over large geographic scales, and that's kind of the key. In some instances in the literature, predator control has been successful, but this has been at much smaller scales. But several conditions have to be met for those types of things to be effective. One of those is that the habitat must be sufficient and managed intensively. A lot of the areas they're having success with predator control on more localized areas has been down in the southeastern part of the U.S. on intensively managed plantations that are in like 2-year fire rotations, managing specifically for quail. So they have to check that box before any sort of predator removal is going to provide any additional benefit. The other side of it is that trapping must be very intensive, and it also has to be sustained over time. And that's really the key when we look at any short-term program, whether it's a bounty or other incentive, is, the minute you take your foot off the gas, if that habitat has not changed, those predators are going to be right back in those areas at the same densities. And many studies have shown that. Most states, including Nebraska, have discontinued a number of different predator control efforts, including bounties. This is generally due to the high cost, the overall lack of benefit, changes in values held by constituents, and reported corruption with some of the control bounties and different incentives that happen. And again, knowing that across the state or across the border, there is a bounty currently being implemented in South Dakota. These are oftentimes done for social reasons rather than biological reasons. And that's what I was kind of pointing out there. I did take a look at just I was just curious more than anything, but looking at fur harvest totals and averages over the last 5 years, Nebraska, just in general, being further south in latitude, having more tree cover, as I mentioned before, we harbor a lot more mammalian predators. There's no doubt. We harvest 3 times more fur bearers. These are the common fur bearers that are included in South Dakota's bounty. We harvest 3 times more annually. So when you put a pencil to that, we would be looking at a similar bounty in Nebraska would cost over $2 million per year. And ultimately, it comes down to, predator control is really treating symptoms of insufficient habitat. When you have abundant, high quality habitat, it will reduce the impacts of predation. That's pretty well documented.
Okay. Thanks for that overview, John.
Yep.
So we have a question about Cass County. This gentleman has been hunting on Rakes Creek and Schilling wildlife management areas, and he sees a lot of other hunters and feels it's somewhat overhunted. He knows there are very many, or a few large operations in the area, and wondered if any of those have been reached out to, those large farmers, to obtain more OFW lands in the county.
Sure. So we do some generalized promotion with our OFW program. In general, over the past 5 years, I showed you the map of our priority areas. Those have really been the targets in recent years, is trying to expand access there. Most of those areas we have a fairly decent density of access we're trying to build on. That's not to say that we're not interested in areas in Cass County or the surrounding counties. And we do hope, in the future, we do hope to target more access around our urban population centers. It's not going to come easy. We really don't have people just beating down our door to sign up for that program for a number of reasons. And so it's going to take some, we're going to have to be adaptive. We're going to have to come up with some innovative ways. There may be some other limiting factors. Landowners may want to know who's on the property, for example. They may want to limit the number of hunters, and you get into programs like that, it can definitely create some complexity. But things like that may be needed in high areas with high human population in eastern Nebraska. So we're definitely open to that, and hope to make some gains there in the coming years.
Okay, next question. How can we keep cedars out of our CRP? The constant issue with them growing and coming in quick to the CRP fields.
Sure. Well, I mentioned the expansion of tree cover, and that's definitely led by our friend, the eastern red cedar. And the nice thing about eastern red cedars is they can be controlled by fire. I know that's not a preferable management technique for many, but it's really the most cost-effective way to control them over the long term. And so there's definitely some other options, whether it's chemically or even mowing, but long term and for cost effectiveness, prescribed fire is really the best tool to combat eastern red cedar.
Okay, so I've had a gentleman with his hand raised, so I'm gonna try this, and I'll unmute Michael. Michael Nahorny, are you out there? You have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. I see block management in other states. And would that help involve, increasing our land usage or our land cover at all using block management?
I definitely think there's some value in that. It becomes a trade-off in a sense. We have surveyed our hunters in years past, asking them preferences about OFW sites. The vast majority at that time really preferred to have no restrictions. as far as the number of days they could hunt or the number of hunters on a site. They wanted to be able to see it in the atlas, show up and hunt it. But there's clearly reasons for looking at a restrictive access type program like you're describing. And what I just mentioned in eastern Nebraska, where you have, you know, relatively high use on some sites, there may be a need to restrict access or restrict use to maintain a quality hunt. The same may be true, you know, with certain big game species as well. That's definitely something that we're aware of. We hope to be discussing more in the future.
Okay, and I will just mention that if others want to, you know, voice their question verbally, you can go down to reactions and hit the raise hand, and I'll get to you shortly. So the next question in the chat is, would replanting plum thicket and CRP or small grains in our road ditches and right-of-ways help any?
You know, I guess to answer your question, plum thickets are very beneficial, utilized heavily, especially by quail, you know, that really rely on that habitat type, especially when it's in close proximity to grain and other, you know, native grasses. But, you know, we do a number of native shrub plantings. We always recommend going with native species. And in general, we normally try to plant those in blocks rather than linear rows. But there's many CRP practices that will actually encourage that. And they do at times provide cost share on establishing shrubs. Sometimes there's cost share through your local natural resource district as well. Second part of your question on small grains. You know, the interesting thing with small grains, and I mentioned that relationship where when you have it in the surrounding landscape, you have higher use by pheasants of a local CRP field. We conducted pretty intensive research in the southwest part of the state for about 10 years and followed birds around, you know, where they were nesting, looked at nesting success, et cetera. The vast majority of those birds were still using CRP to nest in. And so that's still our heavily preferred cover type for nesting. The benefit, you know, to small grains, I believe, at least in theory, is having more of that in the surrounding landscape kind of increases the searchable area for ground nesting predators during the nesting season. So even though pheasants aren't utilizing that for nesting all that much, not as much as they used to years ago, it's still a value and actually, you know, can improve nesting success in adjacent CRP. Doing that in roadsides, you know, I think there'd be a lot of.
Next question is.
Sorry.
Or John, did you have more?
Well, where did I leave off there? Sorry.
I think you answered the thickets and small grains in the road ditches question.
Okay, I guess just the last thing I was going to add on that is, you know, planting those in road ditches, there'd have to be definitely some considerations. You know, we don't oversee the management of road ditches. That would be, you know, some other entities, Department of Transportation, local county and township boards. At times there can be some erosion issues. All those things that have to be kind of considered when you're planting an annual crop along a roadside.
All right, the next question is, why is there very little concentration of Berggren Pheasant Plan efforts in eastern and northeastern Nebraska, specifically Burt and Thurston County?
Okay. Well, the original plan, as I mentioned before, our priority areas were largely based on the pheasant habitat suitability model. And so those relationships I mentioned earlier with a positive relationship with small grains specifically, and a negative relationship with trees really drove that model, which meant that, you know, areas that we work on CRP within those priority areas would yield the most bang for our buck. Now, as you move east, you definitely, you know, you have a quicker stages of succession. Areas can produce birds. I'm not saying that areas couldn't be expanded out there, but a lot of it comes down to prioritization and where we feel we can kind of move the needle. We have had quite a few efforts in northeastern Nebraska, a little bit further west of where you're talking, in our Northeast Pheasant Opportunity area. And within this plan, we did expand a little further east as well. We picked up Madison, Stanton, Pierce counties, I believe. And so I definitely think there's opportunity there. And like I said, that's not to say that that improvements couldn't be made in your counties as well.
Okay, the next question is regarding drought and the severe drought and the decimation of habitat in the Panhandle, Southwest, and other parts of the state. Is there anything that can be done to counteract the effects on habitat due to the severe drought?
Sure, that's a great question, and something that folks have really been voicing. And we've seen the impacts as well. You know, our core areas out there were good for so long, and you know, we've kind of had 2 back-to-back years that have really impacted things. Emergency haying and grazing has had a major impact out there as well. You know, part of it, we need to let Mother Nature turn this around a little bit. You know, I know those things are outside of our control, and that's not what we want to hear. But realistically, you know, pheasant production in that part of the state is really driven by precipitation. Things you can do, you know, again, I know I've been harping on habitat, you know, the whole night, but, you know, when you have more habitat available out there, the better birds can withstand, whether it's drought or severe winter storms or hailstorms. The more habitat you have there, the better, the more likely those birds are gonna survive and rebound more quickly in areas with sufficient habitat. So again, it's kind of the same story. I wish I had a silver bullet to turn that the other direction, but it's definitely been an impact this year and last.
All right, this is about the next couple of questions about bird releases. Where are the released birds purchased? Does the Game and Parks have any facilities like they used to at Sac Wilcox?
Sure. Yeah, we do not have any state-owned or managed facilities anymore. I can't remember off the top of my head when those were last in operation. In recent years, so we started conducting pheasant releases for our special youth hunts back in 2011, and that has always been done on a bidding process. So we generally send a letter out to all, or an email out to all captive wildlife permit holders, or you know, the main ones that produce commercially, and obtain bids from them. Those people are selected, and then we move forward.
As a follow-up to that, what are the deciding factors on where birds are being released? This gentleman is in Keith and Perkins County and hasn't heard of any releases out there.
Sure. Let me flip to, I have a couple slides here. So here's a little information on our pheasant releases. Here are the locations. So the ones shown in red have been in place for a number of years. Back in 2020, we added the 3 western sites, including Encorp, Arnold Trupp, and Bordeaux, to the list of special youth hunt locations. So prior to the youth season, we did release birds on those areas. During the Thanksgiving releases, we just released birds on those shown in red. The reason being, and initially this whole effort was, you know, targeting hunter recruitment primarily, and we're focusing a lot of these releases near our urban population centers and in areas of the state that lack sufficient bird populations. So, you know, I can totally understand where you're talking Keith and Perkins, areas out there that have been impacted by drought. But by and large, you know, there's still a very large amount of public access that offers some pretty high quality opportunities out there. And so it comes down to prioritization.
Okay. The next question is more of a question about a habitat program in Cheyenne County. I think I'll try to get Ted Watchhorn's contact information and hook him up with Matt Steffel and Catherine in the Panhandle about that question.
You bet. And Eric, I might add, if folks on the call do have specific questions about how to improve habitat or what available programs there are in their areas, I'm happy to put you all in touch with the local biologist. Probably the easiest way without putting personal information out on here, just submit an email on our website, as far as public feedback for this plan. I'll get you in touch with the right people.
Okay. All right. Another question about stocking. He has applauded our fish stocking and program in the state, and he wonders if it's possible to do something more with pheasant releases. And he mentions that 18% of South Dakota overall state revenue is generated strictly from out-of-state pheasant hunters.
Sure.
Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. So, a big part of that comes down to funding and what your end product is. There is a fairly substantial cost, and you have to look at cost benefits as well. Our birds in recent years have cost between $13 and $16 per bird. We have monitored participation on our release sites, both during the youth weekend and regular season weekend. Following youth releases, we generally return about 12 to 16% of the birds back to the bag. And so when you look at it, penciling this out, the last couple of years, we've ran about $80 to $100 per bird in the bag. To some that may not matter. And that's why we're here to take public input on it. We also, we don't really know, and there's really a lack of research on this, on what sort of impacts that is having overall to hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation. That is always our stated goal for release efforts, is to get new hunters out there. But are we actually doing that? Currently, we're conducting some research with the university, looking into those things. The other side of it is many of our participants that we talk to at these release sites, many are in favor of releases, and they appreciate the birds we put out there. We do get some negative comments as well, but by and large, it's usually positive. But I do feel there's also a need to get input from our entire upland hunting population as far as our hunters. And we need to do a better job of that, really getting feedback from folks on what they want to see. And we can weigh some of these things out. So appreciate that comment.
All right, next question is regarding safety and the pheasant releases. This gentleman hunted the Thanksgiving release, and there were so many people in the area. He was concerned for his safety while he was out hunting. Any comments on that?
Okay. And again, here's some of the other side of the spectrum at times. Safety is very important. We want to have a safe hunting environment out there. We need to hear that feedback from folks as well. So I don't have a lot of other comments on that. We try to spread birds out the best we can on these areas. But a lot of that is up to the hunters on these areas as well. So we definitely want to work with y'all to keep it safe. So.
All right, John, you can take a deep breath, maybe get a drink of water. I'll handle this next one.
Okay.
Doug asks, I understand there was a recent successful CRP sign up. How many acres were signed up in Nebraska? Doug, that's a great question. I just got the totals. About 77,000 acres were enrolled in Nebraska between both the continuous sign up and the general CRP sign up. And even though that's a fairly large number, we need more. We're as John pointed out, we're losing CRP acres. We're losing large field CRP. And so anytime we can add more, we try, and we put a lot of effort into that. I would also say that we're in a cycle now where we should have general and continuous signups available each year. There were a number of years where, for various reasons, we didn't have acres available in CRP to sign up, and other things, do farm bills to implement, where we didn't have those regular signups. And so we're looking forward to being able to sign up more acres each year as these signups come about, because like I said, that was a frustration in probably the past 5 or 7 years, where the CRP signups just weren't very regular. And so now that we've kind of restarted that again, or FSA has restarted that again, I think that'll really help out. Okay, this next question is about waterfowl production areas. Is there a way to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to keep cattle off these areas, because they are excellent habitat when left alone?
Sure. I'll be happy to try to answer that. You know, we do partner with Fish and Wildlife Service in a number of regards. A lot of it comes down to you know, priorities when it comes to management. Historically, a lot of WPAs as well as wildlife management areas throughout the basins, you know, our general management was slap a fence on it and walk away. And the problem with that over time is that you start having tree issues, you start having invasive plant issues, you start choking out the wetlands where they're not providing any open water habitat. I at the same time realize they're very driven by precipitation as far as availability, but you know, the priorities there on many waterfowl production areas are for spring migration. That being said, I do think there's opportunity. You know, in many areas we have worked with them. I wouldn't say in many areas on their own, that, you know, they're managing the wetland hydric soils differently than the upland soils, leaving some of that cover undisturbed in some of the uplands. But I think there's a lot of different management considerations that go into that equation. So I'm definitely not against it. Would love to see some of those you know, pheasant benefits coming from some of that management as well. So.
Okay, next question is referring to trees and how they are or not beneficial around the state. And this gentleman is out in Cheyenne County, where he sees trees as beneficial. Can you comment on kind of how that difference is from west to east in the state?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And for one to say that all trees are bad when it comes to pheasants is absolutely not true. You know, you look to the north in many more northerly latitude states, the Dakotas, Minnesota, tree rows are extremely important, providing emergency winter cover during those, you know, extended periods of snow cover, blowing snow. We do have areas of the state, like you mentioned, areas of the Panhandle, even areas of the Northeast that do receive substantial amounts of snow and wind, where those are beneficial. There is a trade-off, though. You know, we know how invasive most of those species that are being planted for shelter belts.
Sorry, John. I was trying to admit someone and then muted you.
You muted me. Okay. Well, I'm not sure where I cut off there, but ultimately, you know, trees are of value in certain landscapes. I just think we have to be aware of their invasive nature, especially eastern red cedar and species like Russian olive, things like that. So we're not on the other end of the spectrum trying to fight their invasion and surrounding grasslands in the next 20 years, because that's what's happened everywhere else.
All right, the next question, I think you have a slide regarding this is, why do we allow mowing of road ditches during primary nesting season?
Sure. Yeah, so I think we do have to be cautious in when we say we. For one, just a second here. For one, our roadside management is really not something that we oversee to start with. Depending on the type of road, Department of Transportation or those county and township boards do have jurisdiction over those. Currently under state statute, which is shown here, and I'll blow this up. It's the duty of landowners in the state to mow all weeds that can be mowed with an ordinary farm mower. And it's in the middle of all public roads. Sometime in July for the first time and sometime in September. So under state statute, landowners are required to mow their ditches twice. This is something that we have attempted to change years ago. I believe there was kind of some middle ground, and you'll notice those dates. Mowing during the primary nesting season. And again, those dates depend a little bit on where you're at, but generally speaking, it's May 1st to mid-July. There was kind of a trade-off or a meeting in the middle to push that back until into July, because prior to those changes, it was very more generic where they had to mow anytime. Multiple times, and it didn't specify that it was after July. So really, mowing in early July, most nesting has been completed by that time of year. I'm not saying all of it, and especially when you talk about species like quail that will re-nest later in the year, for sure. And so there's definitely still, some room for improvement there, and that's a great comment and things we can look into some more.
All right, the next question is about crow counts. Are crow counts still being used as an index to pheasant abundance? And if they are or not, could they be done by hiring farm youth or farmers to help do some of those surveys to kind of get them more involved and maybe get them to look more favorably on pheasants and pheasant hunters?
Sure. Well, to my knowledge, we've never had a consistent crow count survey statewide in Nebraska. We have over time have primarily relied on the rural mail carrier survey that's conducted 3 different times a year: April, July, and October. Those generally show long-term trends, and they were correlated with harvest more closely than some of our other surveys that were discontinued, because years ago we did do August roadside counts like a number of states continue to do. Crow counts do have value, and we do this on a limited basis. We've done this in some of our priority areas. I wouldn't say we have routes scattered all over the place, or anything that is sufficient enough to really show us a statewide trend. But we are able to track some trends locally and help communicate that to hunters. As far as farmers or youth helping with those things, there are a number of instances where the public are engaged in wildlife surveys. That's definitely something we have talked about that in the past. It's a good comment. It's definitely something we can look into as a way to engage those folks.
All right, this next question comes up to our staff quite a bit. Is there a way to create more access through the Belf lands with something similar to Washington State's Discover Stamp program?
Sure. So Correct. There's a lot of different models that different states have used to try to gain access on school lands. You know, a few years back in Colorado, there were some changes made where payments were made to the school ground folks to open up some additional lands. We have, you know, we have communicated with the board in recent years in Lincoln, have talked to them about our access programs, what some of the other states are doing. You know, historically, Nebraska and many states east of us, you know, that land has either been sold off. I'm not saying all of Nebraska's has, but some of it has either been sold off in many cases or has always retained, you know, the lessee has always retained the recreational rights. And so, you know, over time, there's been a value placed on that to some degree, but in communicating with them in recent years, we have worked cooperatively with them, and we do have a number of those sites enrolled in our Open Fields and Waters program now. They don't really show up any differently in our atlas. They're just treated like private ground, basically. So that was a step in the right direction. You know, we have reviewed a lot of the properties in Nebraska, and to be honest, you know, a lot of them don't have real great wildlife habitat to begin with. And many of them are very landlocked. There's a lot of isolated tracts up in the sandhills that even if we had access on, we would have no way to get to them without private landowner buy-in from the neighbors. So those are kind of some of the things we have, you know, we've done in recent years, and you know, we'll continue that conversation and look for opportunities to possibly expand that.
All right, you can take another drink and deep breath, John. You're doing a great job. I'll try to handle this one. Doug asks about the current administration's interest in using CRP and other conservation programs to tackle a number of environmental issues. And you know, how can we use that to, you know, expand CRP and get more pheasants in Nebraska? I would just say, Doug, that we look forward to some of these opportunities that are being presented. CRP incentives and rates have increased in the last year, and so we hope that, you know, brings more interest to CRP. But there are also a host of other voluntary conservation programs throughout the state that NRCS and administers, and we're trying to use all of them to get more habitat out there. Our field staff do a great job of working with landowners all the time to try to, you know, not only meet their goals, but also the goals of these issues like water quality, quantity, you know, nitrates in the groundwater, and all of those aspects. And so, yeah, we hope that's an opportunity, and we hope the increased incentives that have come with this new administration will help us get some more habitat on the ground. So appreciate that question. We have a gentleman that is offering potential to maybe do some assistance for, you know, on the ground habitat work. And so Thomas, I would just ask you to contact your, you know, the Lincoln office. You can ask for myself, Eric Zock, and I'll get you kind of squared away. If you're out in near Kearney or North Platte or one of the other district offices, you could call them as well and just ask for one of our private land staff, and we'll try to work with you. Okay, the next question is, in other states and provinces, it is legal to hunt roadside cover and shoot along and or away from the road, but not across it. This largely includes gravel and dirt roads. In most cases, it is not legal to shoot across or along paved roads. Here, changing the current road hunting regulations would open up significant hunting opportunity. Do you have any comments, John?
That's a good comment, and it has been brought up before, obviously with some of our surrounding states and their laws. You know, my take on it, I think there are a few things to consider. One of the primary ones being safety, the other being you know, landowner buy-in. You know, as you saw with some of these, you know, roadside management laws, and landowners being required to kind of treat their ditches or mow their ditches. That's and many times how they kind of assume that. I don't mean that in a bad way at all. But we'd have to have landowner buy-in in Nebraska to make a change like that. I don't think that's ever been, you know, asked of them. And it's something that we could potentially discuss in the future.
Okay, we talked a little bit about predators and their impact on pheasants. This gentleman would like to know, you know, he sees a lot of raptors out there in the landscape and wonders if there's anything that can be done about raptors and their predation on pheasants.
Sure. Well, there's two things that come to mind. For one, you know, all raptors, hawks, eagles, owls are all protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So they're federally protected. We don't have any control over that. But as far as things you can do, you know, and I mentioned this when we were talking about habitat and kind of shifting the odds in the pheasants in their direction, whatever you want to say it. You know, hawks use a lot of perches. We have a lot of isolated, you know, single trees dotting our landscape. A lot of times they're right next to nesting cover. You know, planting larger blocks of habitat where pheasants have the advantage, removing some of those scattered trees or tree rows that are along some of those blocks of nesting cover. All those things can be done to help reduce predation by hawks.
Another predation related question. What is being done, if anything, about feral dogs and cats?
Boy, I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I don't believe they'd be under our jurisdiction, for one. That needless to say, you know, there's a lot of feral cats in a lot of areas. So I don't really know how to answer that and what efforts are being taken towards reducing that. I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you.
All right, this next question I think is a good chance to highlight our tall stubble program. Does it negatively impact birds when stubble is tilled in the fall and winter? Is it worth trying to influence those farming practices?
Sure. So stubble management is really important, and that's one thing in our Southwest research project. You know, when we were looking at habitat use throughout the year, birds did utilize stubble quite a bit, and they used it even more when it was left tall. And a few years back, we offered incentives for producers to leave tall stubble, both wheat and milo stubble. So absolutely, it does have a benefit. And I guess overall, wheat stubble's primary function for upland birds currently, you know, is it provides some brooding habitat in late summer, early fall, and birds do utilize it for a food source and for cover throughout the winter time before it's planted into the following spring. And so birds aren't using that a lot to nest in, but it does have value on the landscape. And again, the more habitat you have out there, you know, the better your birds are going to do. They have more areas to avoid predators. You know, it all benefits the population. So as far as incentivizing that, you know, really, I think we've had more of a shift in people trying to preserve their residue for a number of agricultural benefits. One of the main reasons people were leaving tall stubble was for moisture retention. for their subsequent crop. And so I don't see folks, especially further west, using tillage as much. I think we've seen a big shift in that. And we also saw a big shift in folks using stripper headers and leaving taller stubble. Some of that was kind of happening naturally without our incentives. So I do think that that's kind of gone in that direction, fortunately.
Okay, just wanted to mention, Ted Watchhorn had a question before about habitat programs out in Cheyenne County. Ted, you should have a message from Matt Steffel, the district manager. If you don't find that or can't, you can't see it in the chat, just try to call our office in Alliance, and we'll get you squared away. All right. Next question is kind of regarding the drought again. Are payments to open fields and waters, et cetera, reduced or eliminated when haying is done on those lands?
Yeah, that's a great question that we get from hunters all the time. And our staff do conduct compliance checks each fall and winter. We do look at the fields, and if any impacts were made to the cover, we do reduce or take away their payment. Typically, in the case of haying, especially when it's done during dry conditions where there's very limited regrowth, if any, their entire OFW payment is taken away that year.
Okay, you talked a little bit about targeting some pivot corner work in a couple of the pheasant opportunity areas, and yep. Mark would like to know if I guess just had a comment about could we target those more, and especially those areas where the 4 pivots come together and you have a larger block of habitat.
Sure. Yeah, and there's been a number of different initiatives aimed at establishing habitat on corners, and we do have quite a few options existing for landowners. I think the intent of what I was mentioning earlier is to really have a concerted effort within a given area where we're getting more acres on the landscape, rather than having kind of a haphazard delivery where you have really scattered 7-acre corners here and there. Trying to put those together, like you mentioned, trying to get the 4 corners together, trying to get a producer to sign up all 4 at the same time. That's really the key in that. In an irrigated landscape, it all comes down to available habitat. So any way we can incentivize that or put more of them on the ground in one area, the better.
Okay, George asks, why has the southeast area of Nebraska been eliminated from the new draft plan, particularly since grassland habitat is available and the habitat modeling shows available habitat in that area?
Okay. I assume you're kind of referring to some of those western counties over there, and some of those do contain a fair amount of grassland habitat still remaining. We haven't been overly successful with CRP in that particular area. And the other thing that's changed a lot has been tree cover. And I showed those maps earlier with that transition in tree cover. A lot of our projects that occurred within that area in recent years, probably had pretty good quail benefits. A lot of them were removing trees, conducting prescribed fire, and all those things do benefit quail a great amount. But pheasants really need some of those large blocks of undisturbed cover, and there's really not very much of that in that landscape, and there doesn't seem to be a ton of potential. Now, that all being said, I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of different initiatives going on in that part of the state, and that's not to say that we can't improve pheasant habitat. Throughout the rainwater basins, for example, which includes some of those counties, we work to restore wetlands. We improve uplands surrounding wetlands. We fill in pits to improve the hydrology within wetlands. All of those things can have pheasant benefits. We also still promote CRP in those areas. Like I said, we just haven't been quite as successful. So I do think a lot of that work will continue. It just, some of that came down to some prioritization. But I do think a lot of that will continue, and there's still some opportunity there for sure.
Okay, I'll try to answer this next question. Do we think that Nebraska will ever see pheasant populations that we have seen in like in the 90s, considering habitat we have now? And Tom, I would say that habitat's the key. As John showed and we've mentioned already, we've lost almost half of our general and continuous CRP acres across the state. And that's really where it starts. We just need more habitat on the ground. Also in the last, 30 years that CRP has been around, the landscape has changed. We've got bigger fields, as John mentioned in his presentation. We've got less associated cover like wheat or odd areas. And all those things are taking a toll on our pheasant habitat and our pheasant populations. And so, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we need habitat, and we're working hard to do that. But some of that is tied to crop prices, and corn and soybean prices are pretty strong right now, and so there's still opportunities to get CRP on the landscape. Some of the things that we've looked into is working with UNL on precision ag type practices, where we can look at a producer's field and potentially help them see that maybe a portion of the field isn't as productive or isn't returning on investment. And so some of those things are kind of being looked at, and we're trying to use those tools, every tool we can, to increase pheasant habitat. But really it comes down to that grassland habitat, and without those 700,000 plus acres of CRP that have gone away since the mid 90s, it's going to be a struggle until we can get some more habitat on the ground. Okay, the next question is a kind of a specific question about releasing pheasants, and specifically about Sherman Reservoir. I guess I would say, and John, you can jump in on this too, but Murray wants to know if we could release them in more areas around Sherman Reservoir. Bird numbers seem to be down around those SRAs, and she is just wondering if we could spread those birds out a little more around the wildlife management area.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's something we can pass along to our public land manager there. There's definitely some different considerations and things you have to consider when the birds arrive and getting them out there in an effective manner. But I will pass that along.
Okay, then the next question, to help build up our pheasant population, have we considered changing our current laws, reducing daily and possession bag limits, changing start times to 10 a.m., to reduce pheasant season, the length of the pheasant season, or possibly not having a pheasant season for a year or two to try to improve populations?
Sure. And I have a supporting slide. I guess one thing, and here it is. When we think about closing seasons and any sort of restriction made on bag limits or any sort of hunting restriction, you have to think of a lot of things, because you are reducing opportunity. So there's always going to be some opposition to that. When it comes to pheasants, they're very short-lived, unlike deer or some of our other big game species. And so these birds really can't be stockpiled for the next year. They rely on annual production, which is driven by the availability of habitat and weather. So they really can't be managed in that manner. And one thing I always point out when when it comes to reducing the bag limits is often brought up. And I did glance at some data the other day, and the average hunter in Nebraska hunts about 3 to 5 days per season, and they harvest between 0.5 and 0.75 birds per day. And so that is well below what our current bag limit is. And so in a sense, those types of restrictions don't always have that benefit that we hope they would. They don't have that desired impact. I think I answered that for the most part.
Okay. Michael asks, can you talk a little bit more about, the question we get regarding what is South Dakota doing that we're not? Why do they have pheasants and we don't? That sort of thing. I think you had a slide potentially with that.
I do. So, what it comes down to, when you look at pheasant harvest, annual pheasant harvest in all surrounding states, we come in about 6th. We're behind the Dakotas, we're behind Minnesota, Kansas, and Iowa. And this statement up here is true for all of those. These states have more suitable pheasant habitat currently than we do, and they support more birds and more harvest. Nesting cover in South Dakota is way more abundant currently. Looking at 2019 data, they have 32% more CRP acres. They have over 1 million. We have about 750,000. They have more small grains, as I showed. Actually, I have a figure here. This shows small grains over the last 13 years. And the primary pheasant range in the Dakotas is East River, the eastern half of the state. And you can see small grains are still in that landscape. The only areas in Nebraska that really mirror that at all are the south central, southwest, and portions of the panhandle, which is where we have the most birds. So that is a key component for sure. The other thing overall, their landscape is also just more diverse. Not only the small grains, but they still have intermixed grasslands, wetlands. That East River zone there, shown here, also overlaps with the prairie pothole region. And there's literally hundreds of thousands of wetland basins scattered throughout this region. Somewhat similar to what we had historically in the rainwater basins, although a lot of those have been drained. Wetland draining has been a big thing in the Dakotas as well, but many of these were slightly more, I'm not saying permanent wetlands, but they are more consistent on the landscape, tougher to farm, tougher to drain. So those things still diversify that landscape, and they ultimately have more diverse habitat over a larger area. And many things drive those things. Eric mentioned these, land values, cash rental rates, commodity prices, shorter growing season. They have less irrigated crop and tend to have smaller fields. They also have fewer trees and a more open landscape. So with that, there's really less pressure to maximize production in many areas. Now, they're still running into a lot of the same things we are, with GMOs and different things. There's a lot of soybeans, a lot of corn that's moved into eastern South Dakota for sure, but they've still maintained a pretty good diversity of habitats for pheasants. This makes it more economically feasible to farm for pheasants. You hear that term a lot. Because of that, there's a lot more game farms. There's a lot more hunting preserves, controlled shooting areas, things of that sort as well. They have more public lands. I think one of the estimates I saw, they had about 5 million acres of public land. We have 1.2. So there's a dramatic difference, and obviously a lot of that's in western South Dakota. But when you look at what their agency does, and I hit on this earlier as far as manageable factors, what things can we control? What things can we influence? We can't influence commodity prices. We really can't influence what people plant and cropping rotations. There's just a lot of factors that go into that. They're doing a lot of the same things we are. their private lands program, they're incentivizing CRP. We're doing that in our focal areas. They're restoring wetlands, throughout that prairie pothole region. We do a lot of that in the rainwater basins and elsewhere in the state, provides pheasant habitat. They focus a lot on food plots and woody cover. And that's mainly we have different limiting factors in Nebraska. We really lack nesting and brood rearing cover. We have less harsh winters, less frequent harsh winters where winter cover is not as crucial as it is in the Dakotas. So in a lot of cases, they have an abundance of nesting cover. You insert a little bit of winter cover or food plots, you concentrate birds, and you have birds. And the other thing they do is, their private lands folks are always working to increase access. Again, these things overlap almost identically to what many of the things we do and we've explained today. So ultimately, it comes down to habitat.
All right, this next question you had already kind of covered, but does the Game and Parks monitor walk-in access ground to ensure the cover is maintained throughout the hunting season? And if it's not maintained because it's grazed or hayed, is there a change to the payment that's made to those landowners?
Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, we do compliance checks each fall and winter. Our private land staff throughout the state visit every site. We look for those sorts of impacts, haying, grazing, other disturbances, CRP gets broke out, things of that sort. And when they do, payments are adjusted. Typically when sites do get hayed, like we saw a lot of this year, we remove their entire OFW payment because no huntable cover was available.
Okay. We have a question about the possibility of a program to supply landowners with eggs or chicks to raise and release.
Okay. Well, I've circled back on a few things here today, and with predator control and not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we've had predator control programs in the past. We've also had pheasant. We've also provided pheasants. We had our own propagation going on in we had a couple facilities in the state where we raised a lot of birds, put them out. We had a day-old chick program. I don't remember when that was discontinued. But ultimately, numerous studies over the last 50 years have just shown that this doesn't work. And we really don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's many reasons why: high cost, low survival. The few that survive have lower nest success and chick survival. There's potential impacts to wild populations. We had a past program of that nature that was discontinued due to lack of effectiveness, and it's really not a long-term solution, nor is a predator control. You're putting birds out there knowing they're a short-lived species, knowing they have extremely low survival. That does very little for the future of pheasants over the long term. And so the main long-term solution is more habitat.
All right. Have any studies been done to determine how many hen pheasants are, harvested during pheasant season, specifically, maybe being shot during 30 minutes before sunrise due to low light conditions or anything of that nature?
Sure. Yeah. So specifically with the shooting hours and the low light conditions, a few years back at the beginning of our original plan, that was something in the plan we were looking into, was moving our shooting hours back to 10 o'clock to somewhat mirror what South Dakota does. And like I said earlier, that's really done for social reasons. There's really no biological implications according to research. It's Eric, could you kind of repeat that?
Yes, I can.
Just the first part.
So basically, does allowing shooting 30 minutes before sunrise have an impact on hen pheasants? I mean, are hunters accidentally shooting hen pheasants because of the low light conditions?
Sure. So I went on a bit of a tangent there, but we did talk to our law enforcement folks. There are our eyes and ears in the field, checking hunters. This was rarely brought up as a concern from our law enforcement. I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm sure it does to some degree. There have been some studies in the past that have looked at hen mortality. I don't know those exact numbers. I think it's fairly minimal. Hunters do a pretty good job of identifying roosters, regardless of the time of day. So it's a pretty minimal impact. We did do some research that I mentioned earlier on in Southwest Nebraska, and we looked at habitat use and movements in response to hunting, and that was pretty interesting. Although there may not be a major impact on mortality, these birds were moving. And what we saw on a lot of our public access sites, down around McCook, hunting pressure during the first 2 weeks of season is way higher than the rest of the year. And the minute that hits the season opener and hunters take to the field, a lot of those hens were displaced into surrounding private lands. Some roosters were too. Some birds, hung in there in large blocks, areas that weren't getting disturbed. But ultimately, some birds were moving away. Now, that was a little concerning. All these birds are moving out of here when hunters come through. But the thing we found was once hunting pressure subsided throughout the season, a lot of those birds moved back into those areas. They were still using those CRP fields to nest in. So there really wasn't a major impact other than getting displaced temporarily.
All right. So in Eastern Oregon, this gentleman said there's quite a number of landowners that release pheasants just prior to the season. And he wonders if a permit is required to purchase and release pheasants on their own private land in Nebraska. And if so, would removing that permit requirement increase the ability or, maybe entice more landowners to release pheasants?
Sure. Yeah, so in Nebraska, in order to raise and release pheasants, you are required to get a captive wildlife permit through our agency. The cost is pretty minimal. A game warden typically comes out and observes your facility to make sure it's up to snuff, and you move forward for the most part. There are some requirements with that. Like I said here, and this slide shows that, the stocking of pen-reared birds does very little to restore population. So, I hate to harp on that. That all being said, we have talked in the past with game breeders in Nebraska about some of our rules, some of our regulations, our permitting, and we have worked with them to streamline those. And for the most part, many of them are pretty happy with some of the changes that were made. I don't remember exactly what those were. There really weren't any major recommendations on how to improve that process or lessen the burden as far as permitting requirements. So I can't really speak to what that would do because we don't know, but that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, I'll try to take a little bit of a stab at this next one. How does Nebraska get senators, other government officials on board with making positive changes for pheasants and pheasant habitat? Getting additional hunters to come here from out of state and not overlook Nebraska for other states would be a boon for the economy, and bringing that money to Nebraska is important. And I guess I will just start by saying that, Morgan, we do reach out to both state, local, and federal elected officials. I work with the Farm Bill conservation programs and the policies behind those, and we engage our senators and congressional delegation regarding this topic and other wildlife and conservation related topics, trying to help them understand the impacts that we're talking about pheasant hunting, but deer hunting, turkey hunting, and all outdoor recreation has on the economy in Nebraska, as well as all the environmental benefits of having CRP and other habitat on the ground. And so, your help is necessary too. Anytime that you have the opportunity to reach out to your elected officials and advocate for more conservation, that is always helpful. They love to hear from their constituents. They probably love to hear from you more than me. So, we'll try on our end to continue to educate and advocate for conservation. But it really takes those citizens to contact their elected officials and let them know that this is an important topic, and that you want them to support laws and regulations and statutes that help increase conservation and pheasant hunting and pheasant habitat in the state. John, do you want to touch on anything about, you mentioned a little bit on economic impact that pheasant hunting has in Nebraska, maybe some of the efforts that we've, done in the past, 5 to 10 years regarding, getting more non-resident hunters to see Nebraska as a destination for not only pheasant hunting, but really grouse, deer, turkey, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of things internally. Promoting opportunities is the biggest one. People need places to hunt. Many upland bird hunters are willing to travel, so increasing access is a big part of that. Things we can promote. The other thing with other upland species, we've had our Upland Slam initiative the last few years. I do think we've seen some growth in hunting of other upland bird species, our prairie grouse specifically. But in general, with the first plan, there was some emphasis placed on, reaching out to community leaders across the state to try to engage them in this, and by and large, the economic impact just wasn't as visible to many of those communities as it used to be. Many of them knew right when the 9-day rifle season for deer was, but many couldn't tell you when pheasant season was, which makes it a pretty tough sell to say, hey, let's partner and promote the resources you have. I mean, we definitely have examples of that, working with the city of McCook. We've been able to promote some of those opportunities in their area, but we've definitely lost some of that connection to rural communities and economics in other areas of the state as populations have declined and hunting opportunities have declined. So.
Okay, this next one is about our state-owned areas. Many state-owned areas have housing developments around them or developing around them. This causes a loss of huntable habitat because of the 200-yard safety zone. Is it possible to have a setback rule to not allow housing that takes away huntable state property?
That's a very good comment. I think you're kind of referring to housing and development like around some of our areas. I do think that's something we need to attempt to quantify and see how that's changed over time. I mean, you've obviously seen it. I've seen it as well. Our 100-yard and 200-yard exclusion rule, I can't remember if that's under regulation or statute, but obviously there's differences among states and how that's handled. And so there's definitely some other models and other things we could look into there.
Okay, these next couple of questions are related. In some areas, we lose habitat. We might get some habitat back, in the form of a CRP field, but how do we how do we get pheasants back there if there's no, pheasants in the immediate vicinity to repopulate those areas? And related to that, are there any recent studies on translocating wild birds into suitable habitat?
Sure. Yeah, translocations have been done in a number of states. In general, they're typically more successful than the stocking of pen reared birds. And that sort of thing, I think if the habitat is sufficient, those sorts of things could potentially, jumpstart, those birds building their numbers back up quicker. In a lot of cases, in most of Nebraska, there's still some birds left in the surrounding landscape that, once you provide enough suitable habitat and the right quality, birds typically respond to that. But I definitely think there's cases where that response is much quicker than in other areas where habitat's more isolated. So, that's something I do believe, we should think about in the future, especially with some of our research in eastern Nebraska that I mentioned, and trying to really target CRP enrollment, knowing that it's gonna, have higher cost and be a tougher sell. We need to make sure those efforts are effective. And I think translocation could be coupled with that potentially in the future, something we could look into. But the habitat's definitely got to be there first.
Okay, I believe this is the last question that I have in the chat. Is the genetic makeup of pen-raised pheasants inferior to the genetics of wild pheasants? If so, does this affect subsequent reproduction of wild pheasants if pen-raised birds are successful in breeding with wild pheasants?
Okay. Yeah, so we did do a project with the University of Nebraska here about 3 or 4 years ago, where we did look at the genetics of pen-reared birds and wild birds in both Nebraska and South Dakota. And really, the main take home of that study was that our birds in the Midwest are from 2 different lineages, one being from eastern China and one being from further west in Eurasia, I believe. And ultimately, wild birds, more of them were from that lineage in eastern China, and we don't really know why. It could be that birds survive better in the wild. It could be that those were more prominent in the wild because they were part of some of the original introductions. But we didn't. There wasn't major differences between, the genetic makeup of pen-reared and wild birds. We saw both of those lineages in both wild and pen-reared. It was just one was a slightly more prominent wild birds. So I don't know if I fully answered your question. Right here on this page, there has been studies that have shown in areas where stalking is very prevalent, they have shown losses in genetic diversity. I don't remember specifically if that was specific to pheasants or a different upland game bird, but that is a potential that I don't think has been fully explored.
Okay, well, looks like we have another couple of questions. We have huge blocks of walk-in areas in southeast Nebraska. These areas are groomed for perfect pheasant habitat, yet we still don't see any wild birds on these areas. How can this be a habitat problem? We release pen-raised birds on these areas for youth weekend, Thanksgiving, and in 3 to 4 days, they're all gone.
Okay. Are you referring to our public areas? Or are you talking in general, just on private land?
He had mentioned blocks of walk-in access. So
Oh, walk-in, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm assuming OFW.
Yeah, so we hit on, earlier we hit on, you know, how factors in the surrounding landscape can influence pheasant abundance within an individual patch. And we showed that, you know, areas where we had a lot of small grains, a very open landscape, you know, like what we find in portions of the Southwest, portions of the Panhandle, what they have in the Dakotas, you know, those types of areas maintain high densities of pheasants, largely, at least partly due to that small grain component in the surrounding landscape. The opposite is true with trees, and that's what we've seen on a lot of areas in the Southeast. Trees and creek beds and different fingers of trees that jut out around these CRP fields have all matured. You know, you can look on Google, you know, with kind of a time lapse of aerial photos and see this very obviously how that change has occurred over time, and those things have impacts, you know, to the production and the ability of those CRP fields, even though they're high quality, or those public areas, has implications on how many birds those can support.
Okay, well, this is if this in fact is the final question, it's a good one to wrap up on. What is the main thing you want the hunters that are and folks that are participating in this Zoom meeting tonight to do after leaving this meeting to help improve pheasant hunting? And I might just take one opportunity to, you know, just mention again, advocating for pheasants, for pheasant habitat, for conservation to your elected officials is a very important way to help us maintain funding sources and have the opportunities to sign up acres into CRP and other conservation programs. And so from my standpoint, that's a big one. John, you may have others that you want to mention.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The only thing I would add to that is, you know, many conservation organizations out there do a great job of being that voice for the hunter. And so supporting them, many of them have staff that are in DC that are interacting with those folks, talking about how important habitat is and some of the issues, you know, here in Nebraska. So that would be the only thing I have to add.
Okay, and I just wanted to thank David for the comment about our work, and we appreciate it, David. You know, we hear from a lot of constituents, and it's always good to hear some positive comments about the work we've been doing. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat. I also don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to say thanks for everybody getting on tonight. It really shows how much people care about our resource. You know, I'm really hoping we can make some things happen. Just wanted to remind folks, I have the website listed there. If you haven't already done so, you know, please be a voice. Like Eric was saying, you know, we do accept public comment. We're gonna share the discussion tonight with many of those involved with the plan, and all those public comments that come in will be shared as well. So again, thanks everyone, and feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. And I think I'll wrap up here, Eric, if there's no more questions. That sound all right?
Yep, no more questions. So
okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
I'll stop the recording, John.
Okay, thanks.